Hi, my name is Carl. Let's set some traces in aligned elements. I want to start out by mentioning a few fundamental things about traces in aligned elements. The first thing is that a trace in aligned elements always has a direction. So it starts somewhere and it traces to some other item. In aligned elements, you can set traces from any item to any other number of items. In the Project Explorer overview, we can see the intended traces for this project. We can see that user needs are intended to trace to validation test cases and design input requirements, which we can actually trace from user needs to any other items if that situation should appear. But let's set some traces. I'm going to move over to the risk control measure section here. And I've opened a measure in this form. And down here at the bottom, we can see two sections for outgoing traces, meaning that this measure traces to a requirement, and incoming traces, meaning that these are items that traces to this risk control measure. If I go and want to set some traces, I hit the action button and I have some options here. I can trace to a design input requirement. This is what the system suggests me. Or I can select trace to or trace from and then select which type I want to trace to. But let's set a trace to a requirement. I click on this action item and I get a list of all the available requirements with check marks for the current traces. So if I want to remove a trace, I unselect the check mark, and if I set a trace, I just check these boxes. I can look for candidates by using the filtering option, or I can move over to the chapter list to see the same requirements in their corresponding chapter structure. So I save this and we can see that the traces have been updated here in the trace to dialog. I can get the same kind of options straight here from the ellipsis menu. So I click here and I also have the trace to and trace from option. And if I want to see in which trace context this measure now exists, I can select actions and then find in Trace Explorer. And this takes us to a whole other view called the Trace Explorer, also available here in the navigation bar, the Trace Explorer. And we can now see that this measure exists in a trace context, and we can see all its incoming traces and the entire trace chain, as well as the outgoing traces and their trace chains. And of course, you can also set and remove incoming and outgoing traces from the Trace Explorer. That's how you set traces in aligned elements.